Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Outsourcing Oasis. This week on our panel, we have David Hemmett.
From Blue Coding. Nice to be here, Charles.
Yeah, I left that off, didn't I?
No problem.
Charles Max Wood from DevChat.tv. And this week, we're talking to Paul Miller from Battlestar Digital, which I was just geeking out over right before the show. I was like, dang, that's an awesome name. Why didn't I think of that, right?
Oh, thank you. Hello from Tampa and the home of Battlestar Galactica nerds.
Ah, gotcha.
Nice.
You're probably a fracking Cylon, so.
I can neither confirm nor deny.
Resolve Digital helps build, optimize, and maintain e-commerce, SaaS, and other products built on Ruby on Rails. They can help build new applications from scratch, rescue projects in bad shape, provide ongoing development and maintenance for existing projects, augment your existing team with experienced Rails developers. They also specialize in Solidus and Spree commerce solutions. Go check them out at resolve.digital.
Paul, do you want to tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah.
Sure. So I have a full-time job as the director of software development for a motorcycle financing company based on the East Coast of Florida. Been around for just under 3 years now. And then I have a part-time agency called Battlestar Digital, and we specialize in web development, specifically in the WordPress space.
Very nice, very nice.
Yeah.
How did you get into development originally?
I have always been a nerd, so I'm going to give away my age here, but I remember back when Windows 3.1 first came out, and I hated it so much, I would drop to DOS and use the command prompt. And then one day, I don't know how it happened, but I stumbled on BASIC, if you guys remember the old BASIC. And I don't remember a lot from my childhood, for better or for worse, but I remember seeing that and just my eyes lighted up and I went, code. Literally like that. And I just fell in love with it. Now, the worst part is I actually went on the business side of corporate America for decades because I was always technical. I was always jumping into Microsoft Access to solve some quick problems. But I had always believed you had to have a degree in IT or development or whatever. So I was always kind of a closet developer, just HTML and CSS and VBA, although it's hard to admit that now. And it wasn't until probably, I want to say 3 years ago or so, where I finally said, you know what, I love this. Let's just do it. So I went and took a course on React and Node and Express. And I was already in love with development, and that just sent me over the moon. It was so much fun. So I worked on a lot of different projects there. And I'd always tinkered with WordPress as well. And I always had fun diving into PHP. And so once I started to understand the basic concepts around development, that's when I started really diving in and customizing PHP a little bit more and playing with React and Express and whatnot.
Very cool. I was having a conversation with some friends from high school yesterday, and one of them said, hey, do you remember this game that we used to play in computer science class? And it was, I guess we were probably like 8 or 9 years old back then. And it was this game with a little turtle, and so you type in some commands. It was like, forward.
Logo.
It was logo. Was it logo writer or something like that?
Something like that, yeah.
Yes. And so it was, you could type in, I don't remember the exact thing, but it was like, forward 100, and then the turtle would like draw a line, and then you could turn and so on. And suddenly it hit me like, wow, we were programming back then. We just didn't know it,
Right.
Yep.
They tricked you into it. I remember a text-based adventure game. I don't remember the name of it, but I remember you had to type in commands to move into the house and move around and whatnot. That was a lot of fun. And they even built a little emulator where you could go in and kind of sort of code your own game. That was a lot of fun too.
Very cool. So we were talking the other day on the phone, and you were telling me about Battlestar. And I know you have a...
Every time you say Battlestar, I'm just like,
that's the point.
You were telling me you have a distributed team. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes. So at our agency at Battlestar Digital, I have 2 developers working for me. We were up to 4 for a while when we had a very large project. They're actually both located in the Philippines. And the reason for that is twofold. First of all, cost. I'm based in the US, and so developers here are a lot more expensive and, of course, well worth it. But as a startup, I had a very limited budget, and I don't even remember how I discovered the Philippines. Certainly I'm not the first one to do it, but
Right.
the level of talent's no different. It's just that the cost of living is a lot lower. And so I went to this portal called onlinejobs.ph when I knew I needed some developers, just read all of their articles about how do you hire in the Philippines, and just follow what they did. And I found some phenomenal developers. Like anywhere else, no matter where you go, you have to screen applicants and whatnot. But I found those guys, a number of gentlemen, and brought them on board at different points, and have just been so impressed with their talent and their skills.
Right. So, do they all speak English well? I know that they have their local language, but right. I remember we've worked with some guys in the Philippines, and their English was great.
It really is. And I'm a little rusty on this, but if I remember correctly, when I was first learning about this, it was about a year ago, I believe that they are actually raised on English-speaking television, like cartoons and shows and whatnot. And so just about everybody in the country speaks English, some better than others, but it's very, very widespread. They do have their own language. I forget what it's called, but everybody I've talked to has spoken very, very, I was going to say very great English, but I realize that's probably grammatically incorrect.
My understanding too is that it became like a U.S. protectorate, or
that's right,
this or that during World War II, and so there was a heavy influence from that as well.
So one interesting thing I remember with the Philippines is, with the people I've worked with, is that it's interesting for me because I live in Dominican Republic. And so these guys have the same names that you'd find locally, right? They're all Juan or Maria. They have Spanish names because back in the day, before they were, I guess a U.S. protectorate, they were a Spanish colony. So they kept all the names from back then, but then the language is actually English.
Right.
Pretty interesting.
Well, and I'll tell you, I had such a great experience there with the agency. The agency is kind of my, because it's my own, it's my experimental ground, my proving ground. And it works so well that when it came time to hire additional developers at my full-time job, that was the first place I turned. Not necessarily because of cost, but just because if I can hire anywhere in the world, and I've already now experienced hiring down there, why not start there? And we hired a gentleman by the name of Blass, and he listed himself as a junior developer. It's incredible. I mean, I will never ignore that country when it comes time to hiring again, because the talent and the motivation is just out of this world. It's amazing.
Yeah, I've used onlinejobs.ph, but not for development.
Okay.
And I've been pretty happy with what I've gotten there too.
Oh, I learned something new today, which is onlinejobs.ph. I better go take a look.
I have a referral link unless Paul has one.
No, go for it.
So what is that site though? Is it like a job board or something else?
Yes, basically.
Mm-hmm. So you just pay a fee and then list your job and...
Yeah, you pay a fee for a membership, I think, and then you can list jobs and you get so much kinds of access depending on what you're paying.
Right. Yeah. There's a free level where you can post your job for free. And then if you're on the free plan, it takes them 72 hours to approve your job. If you pay for I think it's $69 a month, at least at the time of this recording, if you pay that, then they approve your job post instantly. And then when you have applicants to your job, on the free plan, they hide some of the information about the applicant. But then on the paid plan, they give you what's called their ID proof score, which to kind of combat fraud, they have each of the applicants, each of the job seekers that are out there submit various documentation to prove their identity. And the more documentation they present, the higher their ID score to give employers confidence in them. So when you're paying the membership fee, you can view the ID score, and there's a couple other things as well. The really cool thing about them, and we're going to turn this into a commercial for online jobs. The really cool thing about them, though, is that, and they'll tell you this: you can pay the fee and cancel like a week later. They don't lock you into any terms or anything like that. So I've bought and then canceled the membership 5 or 6 times when I've hired, and I've ended up just paying for 1 month or 2 months here and there.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, we've had at Blue Coding, we've had mixed success with job boards, and first we found that so we hire across Latin America, and that's a whole bunch of countries. But we found that it depends on each country. There's some job boards that they've tried to do like work across all of the Spanish-speaking countries, but then we'll find some countries where that's like the best job board, and then some countries where nobody uses it. And then we've also found that depending on the job board, you'll get varying degrees of technical talent, right? So there's some where you'll get junk, and then others where you get really, really good applicants. And the pricing is all, it's everywhere too. We've there's some job boards that will charge you nothing. Some will charge you $10 per post, and then some will charge you $300.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have found, at least with online jobs, and this might just be a reflection of the industry as a whole. Typically, if the ID score or the verification of the worker is high enough, when they say that they're a developer, they're truly a developer, at least in the JavaScript space. I've hired a couple of JavaScript developers through there. Mm-hmm. But I've also hired WordPress developers, and there seems to be this, there's something unique about WordPress developers. I think there's a confusion between configuration and true development. So I've hired developers, I'm using air quotes, in the past that really were just really, really good at configuration.
Right. They know how to set it up and install plugins, right?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Okay. And maybe go into PHP and add a custom function.
Yeah, that's tough for me. And also, I think I've coded PHP at some point in college for a project or something. And I can probably read most of it, but I'm not any good at it. And so whenever we have a client come to us and tell us about their PHP project and they want a custom plugin, and it's kind of like, it's so different from everything else that's out there that oftentimes I don't know what box to put it in. And it's hard for us it's hard for me personally to figure out who a good PHP developer is, right? So you gotta, or so not PHP, a good WordPress developer, because PHP, I know how to figure out, right? It's the WordPress part of it. It's very unique, and fortunately we have some more senior WordPress guys that can do that, but I certainly couldn't.
Yeah, that's good. And
I've done some WordPress dev, and it was painful. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it is unique because, first of all, you have to have good coding standards, but you're also building an extension for an existing code base. So that adds an extra level of complexity and testing and everything else that goes along with that.
Yeah, for me, I think part of it is that I've been using MVC style frameworks for so long, Ruby on Rails. And then I remember one time I jumped into a PHP project. It was Cake PHP and Laravel. And they've all kind of been structured in the same way, so I could go and look at the code base and understand what's going on. And whenever I look at a WordPress project, I'm like, whoa, I have no idea where to start.
Yeah, I hear you.
But anyways, if I have a WordPress thing, I'm going to definitely reach out to you.
Cool. Thank you.
A good friend of mine is big into Laravel, and it's always funny because he's telling me, it's got this awesome feature and that awesome feature and this other awesome feature. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know if Rails invented that, but it certainly popularized it.
Yeah. So, Paul, you were telling us about your lousier experiences earlier in hiring. You want to get into that a little bit? How long have you been trying to hire, outsource development?
Yeah.
Most of your experiences, I have to say, welcome to Failure Oasis.
It certainly felt like that on more than one occasion. It was kind of like the perfect storm. So I started with a motorcycle finance company, which is my full-time job, in November of 2018. And they're a small company, probably about 30 employees. And I started I believe about a month after they lost their one and only developer, a Ruby on Rails developer. And this particular company just kind of set it up. They have a platform where if somebody wants to lease a motorcycle, they'll go into a dealership, and if they find a bike they're interested in, they'll ask to be qualified with the dealer. And so the dealer will sit down, similar to if you lease or buy a car with a loan, the dealer will open up a portal to a finance agency, and we hope that it's us, and enter in the customer's information, submit it to us, and then we'll come back with the score and the terms of the lease and whatnot. So certainly a production application, one that we have to keep running to keep our dealers happy so they don't go to the competition, and one that has to be secure as well, just due to the nature of the information that's submitted. So I came on board about a month after we lost our one and only developer. He was poached off to Silicon Valley. And probably about 3 weeks after my boss had hired another firm to come in and do the development on kind of a project, kind of a staff augmentation basis. And I came on board to take over that process and be a transformational individual within the organization. So it was kind of like the perfect storm. And we didn't have Agile, and we didn't have any documentation. I know that's never happened before. Nobody to do the handoff to the new firm. So it was pretty crazy. And I've got a couple stories that I think will illustrate just how painful it was.
Well, let's get into them.
So I think really one of the biggest challenges we had right out of the gate was not having a good communication plan in place. And we talk about communication so much, it's almost cliche, right? But it's just, if you don't have communication, nothing else is going to work. And because we hadn't set up a good cadence with that, we brought in this company. We didn't have any business analysts, so we didn't have any requirements for them. We just said, we need this, and we need this, and we need this, and we need to get it done as quickly as possible, which is, again, always the case. And because we didn't come in and set those expectations, we had projects that would take longer and longer and longer through the development life cycle before they were finally delivered. I mean, we were trying to do sprints, but we'd go 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks without a release. And then we'd have a huge release, a release night where we had so many different changes that it would just go south. We had one critical project where we were moving to a lease management system. And so we had to take our flagship application I talked about earlier and build an integration to this lease management system. And because we had no in-house developers, of course, we gave this to our vendor. And we didn't have checkpoints in place, and we didn't have the detailed requirements that we needed. And so as time went on, I had a number of calls with the CTO and the CEO of that company. I said, this is important. We've got to get this done. But because we hadn't started out of the gate correctly, there was just this feeling of dread that would continue to rise the closer we got to our cutover date. And sure enough, the weekend of cutover, we found out that it wasn't ready, and we missed a lot of our deadlines. And I think there's a lot to unpack in there, but that was a big fail for us as an organization. And as the director responsible for the whole project, I mean, that's on me, right? I can sit there and blame the vendor, but because I didn't come in and set my expectations out of the gate, everything happened from there, right? All the chaos came from there. And so that's what led me to kind of develop the 3 rules that I like to follow when it comes to having a successful engagement with outsourced vendors. Because if you don't do that, can you really blame them? If you don't tell them what they need, can you really blame the vendor for not delivering?
What are the 3 rules?
So the first one, I mean, it really is communication. And I think we should talk tactics too. So when we bring in, as an employer, when I bring in a vendor on a project, there's really 2 different models. One is project-based work, and one is staff augmentation. We've done a little bit of both, but in my experience, just with the company I'm coming from, we needed staff aug. When you have no developers and you have a product that constantly needs improvement, you can't do it on a per project basis. And so when I look at how to communicate on a staff aug type project, it's almost like treating the people you're working with, your vendors and your developers to the vendor, it's almost like treating them as an employee or as somebody who's working directly for you. And so for me, what I found works best is having a stand-up on a daily basis. Something you would do with an in-house development team is you have that stand-up. For us, it's 10 a.m. every day, a 15-minute stand-up. What did you work on yesterday? What are you working on today? Where do you need help, right? I think that's key, because so often in our lives and in our work, it's easy to skip a checkpoint, right? You might say, hey, I've just been slammed today. I meant to call my developer today. I'll call him tomorrow. And then the next fire comes up the next day, and before you know it, a week has gone by, and you fall into the kind of the trap that I found myself in with this project.
So that's a really interesting point. Treating staff augmentation as if, the vendors that are coming in are your employees. So that's what we offer through Blue Coding, at least, is we'll find you a really good developer, and we'll say, Paul, here's the guy. Let's integrate him into your system, right? Mm-hmm. And we're not handling project details. We're not getting into deadlines. But we're making sure that you have the right person available at the right time. And then after that, it's essentially on you to make sure that you put in the processes in place, and we'll help with that. We'll make sure that you have at least an idea of what you're doing. But the relationships that we have found have been most successful are the ones where there is not a real differentiation between the developers that are working through a third party, or they're just individual contractors, and the in-house employees. And of course, there's going to be some differences in benefits and so on.
Sure.
But in the process, we always feel that the best relationships are the ones where our guys are in stand-ups, they're in decision-making meetings, they're in the sprint retros, or in the sprint planning. They're not just being handed off tasks and saying, hey, just get this done and come back to us with it. Because then you get people that have situational awareness, which is something one of our previous guests was bringing up. You get people that understand what's going on and can actually make decisions around what they're doing. But the other element that is interesting that you brought up is the fact that you need somebody on your team that understands what's happening. So for me, one of the keys that I find for a successful staffing relationship is I need somebody on my client side that knows how to run a development process. Because if you're not technical and you have nobody on your team that's technical and don't know how to run a project, and I send you a really good developer, you're going to have a really good developer running around in circles, building whatever you tell them to and not getting the project done. So just thought that was a pretty interesting idea to point out there.
Well, and I also want to just throw in on this. I've seen teams where they had 100% co-located full-time people working projects that failed on the things you're talking about for successful outsourcing. And they had the exact same outcome that Paul was talking about, right? Mm-hmm. And so what you're talking about here isn't, here are the secrets to outsourcing. It's just, here are the secrets to a successful project. Apply them to outsourcing, because outsourcing magnifies some of these issues and helps mitigate some of the other ones, right? Because some of the hiring stuff's easier if somebody like David is vetting people. But the flip side is if they're remote, if they're not steeped in the culture like the rest of your developers are and things like that, right? You're onboarding them and having these problems at the same time initially. But you're going to have the same problem if you hire a new person.
Yep. I mean, they're the fundamentals, right? And we know through our practice, right, as development managers, that these are what work for our developers when they work directly for us. Why would it be any different if we're going through a third party to bring in staff aug, or kind of that hazy in between, that hazy middle between a project and staff aug, where you say to the vendor, I need full-time people, but you manage them. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense, right?
Yeah, I agree.
The practices are all the same. And so for us, if we bring in another vendor, you're going to be involved in the daily stand-up. Now, I know some companies like Automatic, I don't believe they actually meet and have a stand-up, right? I think that just because they're distributed, they post their updates. For us, for our culture and for our size, we found it's critical to have that daily stand-up, right? And then we use Slack and whatever tools you want to use just for that constant communication back and forth. And I think that it's important when you're working with a vendor. I mean, people are people. It doesn't matter who's getting the paycheck. If I, as a hiring manager, am paying for a result, people are doing that work. So why would I treat somebody differently because they're a contractor or because they're coming through a vendor versus somebody that works for me? It just doesn't make any sense. Yeah. And that extends to praising publicly and coaching privately, depending on your engagement, right? I mean, these are people and they take pride in their work. So why would you treat it any differently just because of who they work for?
No, the other thing is that, oftentimes the legal status, whether they're a contractor or an employee, is just, are they in the U.S. or not?
Yeah.
So oftentimes we have contractors that are, for the most part, being treated as employees. They can't legally be them because maybe they don't have a social security number, and we have a U.S. Company. But other than that, they're part of the team. So before we, move forward, I'd like to go back to your 3 rules. That was pretty interesting. So you mentioned number 1 was communication. Do you remember what the other 2 were?
I do. And the one thing I want to say on that first one about communication is if you're not in that staff aug model, if you're in a project model where you say, here's the project that I have, please go do it and then deliver it back to me, then you find yourself really in kind of that more traditional classic project management or waterfall model. And I think it's so important to follow a lot of those disciplines in project management, like a weekly call with your single point of contact, right? Whether it's the developer manager, the leader, whoever, milestones, having a schedule and hitting those. We all I personally don't like waterfall, but it has its place in this kind of a model where you're using a project. Risk mitigation, you've got to try to identify as many risks up front and then have a plan to mitigate those risks. I just think that's so critical. From a communication perspective and making sure you have success. And that's some of the misses that I've had in the past. The second one is, I think you have to own the requirements, right? If you're bringing in somebody to help on a project or a vendor to come in and help you deliver for a couple months or what have you, it's your work, it's your goal. You have to own the requirements. I found myself in a position in the past where I had no business analyst. And so I thought, well, I'll just have the vendor, the same one that's going to do the development, also write the requirements. And, while we'd like to think that is efficient, I think that can open us up to the risk of maybe not getting the work product that we're looking for and necessarily fully documenting the requirements that we need, whether they need to be broken down in agile user stories or put in a traditional waterfall document. I mean, I had an occasion where I told a vendor, I have no business analyst, so here's what I need. You go write the requirements. Not something I should have done in retrospect, but I thought, well, I'm busy. I've got 36 calls after this one, so you go do it and I'll trust you to do it. And while there might not be anything wrong with delegating that work, as the executive or the manager that's accountable for the success of this project and this software, you have to be involved in the requirements. Your developer can do an awesome job, but if the user story is wrong or the business requirements are wrong, then it doesn't matter anyway.
Yeah. I mean, I fully agree with you. I think there is a very particular situation where you can pull it off, and that's when you have a really good, really special consultant or vendor that can take care of that for you. And sure. I guess, we also run an agency, which is Resolve Digital. And we have some clients that are not technical at all, and they don't know how to deal with requirements. They can't properly write a story sometimes. But our understanding is, look, since these people can't do that side of the work, we need to do it. And our objective is that they're really, really happy when this sprint ends. And so we need to do a really good job of going in and understanding what their business is like and what's going on and why they actually want to build this and help them around that. But that's not a development piece of work. That's
right.
That's building out business requirements. It's a business analyst's piece of work. And so, there are some really special developers that have all those skills together and can do it. They're few and far between, in my opinion. And then there's some firms out there that will specialize or have that capability. But for the most part, I agree with you. If somebody comes to us and says, hey, these are the requirements, build that, and those requirements are wrong, they're not going to get the product they wanted.
Right.
And so, that's a tough one.
Are you stuck at home climbing the walls when you should be hanging out with the community at the latest conference to get canceled? Are you wondering where to hear your JavaScript heroes like Amy Knight and Douglas Crockford and Chris Heilman? After the cancellations, I decided to put on a JavaScript conference for you, online. I invited my favorite folks from around the web and got them to come speak at an online event just for you. Go to jsremoteconf.com and check out our speakers and schedule. The conference is on May 14th and 15th. The call for proposals is open until March 31st. Come join us at an online conference that we guarantee will keep you safe and keep you informed. jsremoteconf.com.
Yeah, I mean, that's true whether your BA is in-house or working with the vendor, right? If you don't have the good requirements, then garbage in, garbage out. And I want to go back to something you just said. That's the key differentiator right there. What you said about going in and really understanding the business and the need behind it. It's not enough to just say, I want users with a certain role to be able to go in and open up this menu and be able to take this action, right? Why? Understanding why is important, because if you really have a deep understanding of the business case behind whatever requirement that is, then you, in your experience, having worked on other projects in the past, you're probably able to see around corners and anticipate things you've run into in the past. And that's where having expertise is so important. So I agree with you. In a model where you're really focused on understanding the business, I think it can work. I think if you pitch too many things over the wall to a vendor that maybe doesn't have the staff and is trying to rush to get everything done, I think that's where you run into problems. But in your case, David, where you're really taking the time to understand it, I think that's the key. And that's the key whether you're in-house or not, honestly, understanding the business driver behind the requirement.
I agree with that. And the other thing I'll say is it's what you say. It could go both ways, right? So if the outsourced team or even your in-house team is not able to really understand the business reasons behind the requirements and build them out properly, then you're going to have a bad time either way. The flip side to that is if you have a team like the one we have at Resolve that's been on, we do a lot of e-commerce, right? So we've done 50 e-commerce projects. Each guy on the team has probably worked on 10 different projects. They've seen a lot of the same issues come up. And so oftentimes we'll hear a requirement and we'll say, okay, wait a minute, let's talk about this. We've been down this road before and it doesn't take you where you think you want to go. Why are you doing this? And let's try to find a better solution. And so that's the flip side of it is if you have somebody with both the business knowledge and then the technical knowledge that has been through something similar before, then you get an advantage there.
Well, I love that approach because you're talking about becoming an advocate for your customer and bringing your experience on a lot of different projects to bear. And as a business manager, one of the things that I tout when I'm off looking for a new job, looking for my next employer, is I like to explain and highlight the fact that I have experience across different industries and even different verticals within certain businesses, operations, and everything else. So if I, as a manager, see that as a benefit to offer my next employer, it's exactly the same what you're talking about because you've done 50 different e-commerce projects for different companies, probably in different industries. You've seen more and you can bring a fresh approach, or you can say, hold on, like you said, we did this before and this is what happens. So be prepared for that or think through it. Or maybe it's an opportunity you can take advantage of, Mr. Client.
Yeah, in a lot of cases, though, and I love how we're kind of focusing on the outcome, right? It's like, how do we get this outcome? How do we get the best version of that? And what's interesting there is that, then it's okay. Yeah, the approach that you're taking to get this outcome, we've gotten this outcome for other people. And I think the other thing is a lot of folks don't come with a clear expectation, right? It's not, they don't actually know what they want. I mean, they know that they want a solution built that's going to make or save them money. But beyond that, they don't know what that outcome actually looks like. And so they don't get the input that they need. And sometimes they don't trust the outsourcing agency to give it to them. And I think that's where a lot of this falls down. So just that outcome focus and then the solution focus, right? And that way you have that feedback cycle that you need.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned that because I think that as a manager, as a client, developing an appreciation for that kind of input from your vendor, and sometimes that's almost like a 4-letter word, but I think that appreciation for that comes over time and with experience. And now it took me a long time to get to this point. We were talking before the call about dating myself with some of the stuff I liked back in the early 80s. But I like it now when my contract developer or my vendor says, stop, slow down. I know you want this, but with my client GM or whoever that I worked with 3 months ago, we tried that and here's what happened. I'm a business manager. I don't want to cause more problems than I already have. So I'd like to view you, the vendor, as an advocate and as a trusted partner to bring your experience. That's why I hired you, right? It's your expertise. And that doesn't just extend to punching the clock or giving me a deliverable. Tell me what you've seen. Help me make a better decision. I think that's huge. And when we go outside of our organizations, one of the things that we're really looking for is bringing that expert opinion to bear. So we can say, yes, absolutely. We don't have this experience in-house, but you, Mr. Vendor, oh my gosh, you've done this for 60, 100 different people. Yes. Tell me what you've learned. Tell me where I'm going to screw up so I don't make the same mistakes.
Yeah. So this is really interesting. There's two things that I find are dangerous, especially when combined, right? So one is inexperienced clients and the other one is inexperienced development people or shops. And so I'll tell you what I mean by that. I have I have friends who know why I'm into development, and they'll come up and say, hey, my friend is looking to build this project, or I'm looking to build this project. And most of the time we don't take those projects because they don't have the budget, right? And it's just not something we're into. But what I'll do is I'll just walk them through it, and I'll tell you, hey, look, I'm not going to build this for you, but I'll walk you through what you can expect, right? And so I'll say, based on what you're telling me about your project, this sounds like you need a budget of X, and this is kind of the timeline you can expect. And they'll usually say, oh, but I spoke to this developer and he says he can get it done in, half the time and with half the money. And that is always a red flag for me. And this is the reason. What happens is, and then they won't listen to me, and they'll go off and try to build this thing with this person. And I'll get in touch with them 3 months later, and they'll say, oh, the guy, I can't find him, he doesn't take my calls, and he spent all the money, and my project is not complete. And what happens is almost always the same. What happens is you have an inexperienced developer who will pitch the client on a number that sounds reasonable to them, right? Based on their their initial estimation. They're not following the double or triple your estimation rule, which is something that I'd always recommend. If it's 100 hours, say it's 200. But they're not doing that. And so then what happens is this guy is, that's his paycheck, right? So he'll charge you part of it up front and then part of it halfway down the road, or hourly or whatever. And 2 or 3 months down the road, they'll have run out of budget, but there will still be a lot of work to be done. And so then we have a situation where the client says, well, but you promised this within X days and X budget. And the developer says, in his mind, I guess, well, I still need to make a living. I need to take on some other projects. And so this gets put on the back burner. And so that combination is really bad when you have two inexperienced parties. And I think if you're an inexperienced client, hire a really good team. If you don't have the budget, don't do anything, but hire a really good team that has done this 20 times before and knows exactly what will happen, because they can take care of you, right? If you have a good team, they'll walk you down what you can expect. They'll manage your expectations. They'll let you know if your budget is not large enough. They'll let you know early if you're off track. All of that stuff that kind of helps you figure it out, right? On the other hand, if you are a much more experienced client, and you have project management experience and you've been down this road a few times, well, then you can take the opportunity and hire some. I wouldn't like to say less experienced developers. What I'm trying to say is good developers without the business and project management side of things. Does that make sense? But you have to have one or the other. Either you have to be really experienced in managing them, or they have to be really experienced in managing you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think I noticed something back when I did a lot of freelancing, and I noticed something that come up, especially with the rise of platforms like Upwork, and I made a good living off of Upwork, so I don't want to in any way demean the platform, but one of the red flags I saw after I started taking a number of clients through Upwork is when somebody would put a job posting up there and they would say, I need X, Y, and Z. This should take no longer than X if you know what you're doing. Oh, okay. How do you know that? I mean, so right away, you know that you're probably going to go into an antagonistic negotiation. It's just not even worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other big one is when they want an estimate up front. Like, I can't give you an estimate up front. I don't know what the work is yet.
Right.
I've heard your problem. I don't actually know what's behind that problem. I have to go look, and it's going to cost you money.
Yeah. And I think, we all have to start somewhere. And I'll tell you that when I started freelancing, I wanted to get the project. And so it's human nature, unfortunately. I really wanted it, so I'd underbid. Sometimes I would do it knowing that it was going to be a lot more work, but saying, I just need to get the experience so I can put it on my portfolio. I think that's okay if you know what you're getting into and you're willing to do it for less. Although I never recommend that we undercharge. It's just not a good business model. But, if you find yourself, you can't get that first client, you know what you're doing, you know that you're trading some of your time in for less money, I think that's fine. I think where the danger comes in is when you have, whether it's a solopreneur or a small shop or even a large shop that just says, we're going to tell them what they want to hear so that we can win it. And then, once the client finds themselves in their trap, then we can charge them more, right? And say, oh, there's a scope change, or we ran into unanticipated efforts or whatever. And so,
I mean, that's kind of the people you just don't want to deal with at all. If that's your business model, I want nothing to do with you.
Well, and I think, and that's why earlier you were talking about this, is I think it's so important that the individual at the company, at the client that's hiring and managing the vendor needs to understand development, or at least needs to understand the complexities of technical projects. And if they don't, if you're a CEO or a COO or a direct or whatever, find a peer, find a friend of yours that works for another company and ask them what they've learned, because you're not doing yourself or the vendor or your company any favors if you go into this not knowing what you're doing. You're setting everybody, especially yourself, up for failure.
Yeah, there's another solution, which is what some companies we've seen do, is they'll hire on their side a consultant to guide them through this process. Mm-hmm. And so we'll have a consultant counterpart that represents our client, so to speak. And that sometimes works well. I guess it depends on who you pick. But yeah, we've seen that quite a bit.
Yeah, it makes sense. The other thing that I want to mention, kind of the other thing that I learned with the most recent project is that it's important to have a clear escalation path, because we're all human. Things might go wrong. So rather than waiting until something goes wrong with your project, have a clear escalation path. And if at all possible, a single point of contact, that single throat to choke, because you don't want to be bouncing around to different people at your vendor saying, I've got a problem, I need it solved. On the same token, as a vendor, I hate it when I have to escalate to 3 different people at my client, not because I have anything better to do necessarily, but because if something's going off the rails, I need to know who at the client is empowered to make a decision to get it back on track. That's so important. And it really just dovetails back into communication.
Yeah. So I haven't forgotten about point 3, but just before we get into that, one thing you mentioned was interesting. You said, well, in the past, you had taken some projects and essentially bidding lower than you thought they were worth, right? And we've all done that. And hopefully you're doing it because you need the experience and you're willing to take on the extra work. But I found something interesting, and this is a conversation that I frequently have with our engineering lead at Resolve. Is he says, "Look, David, stop bringing these small projects. The clients are much more difficult to please. They're a lot more work for us, and we can't do as good of a job. If you can get bigger projects, that's much better." And
I found that is almost universally true, by the way.
Yes.
Yeah. But,
smaller clients are a bigger pain.
Oh my gosh, yes.
So I'll tell you about an interesting experience I had being on the other side of that, right? Because we're always on the selling side, and so we're the ones dealing with a client with a small budget. And we found that exactly that. If the budget's too small, they're going to have a bad time. Everybody's going to have a bad time. So I was working on an employer branding project that we're pulling together, and I said, look, I just want a website for this. I want to build a nice website, and we didn't have anybody internal to do it at the moment. And so I reached out to a good friend of mine who runs an agency, and I really like his design. And I said, Leo, can you help us set the site up? And so, I said, look, I've got a limited budget. This is essentially a vanity project. We don't want to spend too much money on it. What can you do for us? And so he was trying to, he's serious about his work, right? And so he wants to get everything right. And he's going through everything from, the first thing he said is, David, where's your style guide? And I said, we know what colors we like. He said, well, I can't build a site if I don't have a clear picture of, what I'm representing. And so he started working on that. And halfway through the project, I was like, but we've already spent, 20 to 30 hours on this, and I don't have a site. And at that point, what I realized was, I'm that client. I'm the client that has the budget that's way too small for the project he wants to take. And I'm having a bad time because I'm counting pennies,
Yep.
Yep.
So that's just a warning out there to anybody hiring any type of vendor for a job. Be warned that you won't get a good result if your budget is too small. And hopefully you'll have a vendor that will tell you, look, we just won't take it because you're going to have a bad time. Yeah. So, Paul, how about point number 3? What was that? What was learning number 3?
Actually, you got me on it earlier when I talked about having a clear escalation path.
Oh, okay, cool.
Because I ended up having to bounce between, with a recent vendor, 2 different executives at that company. And depending on the issue, I had to talk to one, I had to talk to the other. I think with a clear escalation path, you also need to put some rules around how that's going to happen. Some people love texting, some people love email, some people like phone calls. The particular executive that I had to talk to for half of my issues with the vendor loved texting. And I try, especially now that I'm married and I have kids, I'd like to stick around for them. If I'm driving, I try very hard not to look at my phone. And the challenge with me when I'm busy is that if I'm driving somewhere and he texts me, by the time I get somewhere and I take another phone call and I run in to get my Starbucks or whatever, sometimes I forgot I had a text message in the first place. And again, that was on me because I told him clearly after about the 10th or 11th time that happened, but up front, I should have said, aside from our weekly checkpoints, if we need to talk, please send me an email because I don't always answer my phone. I don't always grab the text messages because I have a workflow to make sure that I'm not getting distracted. So I should have said as the client, this is how I need you to communicate with me. And I think the good vendors in that space will either follow that or say, actually, no, here's what we have found works best when it comes to communicating, right? But you have to have that conversation. And of course, I've had clients that all they do is text all the time. Well, that's their prerogative because we didn't talk about it in the past. But I think it's so important to say, here's my escalation path. Here's how to get a hold of you. And here's how we expect to resolve any issues that come up.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
I'll tell you. Go ahead.
I just want to add on. I mean, you gave them the means, but also, somewhat of a time frame, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, I'm not checking under these circumstances. I always put a number on that. So, if it's at night and I'm asleep and you text me, I'm not even going to see it till 7 a.m. Right?
Right.
I put a number on it. If you text me during the day, I don't look at my phone under these certain circumstances. So, don't expect to hear from me for like 2 or 3 hours. I might get back to you right away, but don't count on it. And that way people know what that expectation is.
Yeah. One thing we do at Resolve is we'll have an emergency service. And so do you want somebody to be on call 24/7? That's fine. We'll charge you a monthly fee for it. And there will be somebody assigned to that. And that person every month for being available on his phone when you need them. And then, so in e-commerce, things happen. Sometimes something will break at 11 at night. And if we find out and we see the issue, we'll go ahead and fix it. But if you want to call us at 11 at night and have somebody definitely get on it, you should, be aware that has a cost. Somebody has to be aware.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'll tell you, I love the outsourcing model because as an employer, especially, I specialize in small companies. So typically companies that have between 30 and 200 employees. And so we don't always have the budget. And if I'm building a team, so I've come in and I've done IT transformations in the past and engineering transformations in the past. If I have the budget now based on my experience to actually bring in people to work for me on a contract to hire for basis, now I know to go anywhere in the world, right? Because my eyes have been opened. And there are challenges that come with having remote workers, but I think that while nothing can necessarily 100% replace face-to-face communication, there are so many tools we have now that as long as we work hard at communication, then I think the rest falls into place, right? I've never met any of my employees or any of the contractors I have working for me. And it doesn't matter because we build those personal connections. And so if I need to bring on developers and build a team, or maybe it's just instead of contract to hire, I'm just going to build in some folks on a staff aug basis. I don't care if they're on site or they're remote. What I care about is you're the best person that I can afford to do the job. And it's foolish of me to think that I am going to find the world's best person every single time here in Tampa, Florida, right? Not every talented person is located here and not everybody's going to want to move here. So why would I limit my pool of talent? And
you need to tell that to the Bay Area folks.
Well, yeah. Well, now if I could get them to pay me,
I don't think they've heard about that yet.
If I could get them to pay me a Bay Area salary and live in Bangkok, I'm set. but I don't think that's going to happen. But the other thing too is that, especially with teams like the one you're building, David, and with some of the other vendors that I've seen in the past, is that because this is becoming more and more of a model, it's so beneficial to me as an employer to say, okay, I've got my team. Maybe I've got 2 or 3 in-house developers, but I have a huge project coming along. I don't have the budget and I don't have the time to hire 5 developers to come in for 6 months to deliver on this major initiative. I want to go out and find a vendor that actually knows development and knows how to communicate and can be my strategic partner and come in. And I don't care where they're located. If they can come in virtually or on site, I don't care. At the end of the day, I have business objectives to grow my business, to grow my revenue, to improve my operations. As long as I can get it done, I'm happy. I don't care where you're located, right? Yeah. And so that's why I think this is so important. And I love the fact that we have the tools now that we can use to manage these types of processes. As long as we remember that we're working with people, I think everything else falls into place.
Yeah, definitely. That's one of some of the best relationships we have with our clients. We've been working for years, and in the first few projects we work on, then we ask for them for detailed descriptions of the position, and we want to have conversations about their team culture and so on. After we know them, they'll just reach out and say, "Hey, David, do you have 3 PHP guys this experience?" And I'll say, "Sure, Shannon from my team, get on it," and they'll have their guys in 2 or 3 days, and they'll have their projects running. And that's something recurring. And so that's kind of where we come in. We can fill that gap when you have a larger project or something like that. It's pretty interesting. So I think we might be running out of time. Charles, how are we doing there?
Yeah, we're pretty much at the end of our time. And I have a call coming up in a half hour. So we go over a little bit, but yeah.
Yeah, I think there might have been some subjects left on the table. We can hopefully have another episode in the future, but maybe it's a good moment for Paul if you want to share some picks.
Yeah, so I have 2 picks this week. One of them is not related to anything we talk about. It's the Dark Tower series by Stephen King. I have read it twice now, and when I ran out of books in my other series to read, I picked it up again. I know how it ends because I've read it twice, but I couldn't help it. I just got sucked back in. I'm on book number 6 of the 7 books, and I just love it. It's just Stephen King. It's not a horror novel, which I think Stephen King has a reputation for. He's just such a fantastic storyteller, and I love his character development. I may have shed a tear or 2 back in the day at certain points because of the way that he writes, and it's just phenomenal. So that's my first pick. My second pick is actually, if I'm allowed to say this, one of the sister shows, JavaScript Jabber, episode number 426, which just came out. I'm looking at my whiteboard here. Killing the Release Night with Dave Caro.
That was a fun episode.
That episode is incredible because we're building out, we've got a kind of a nascent continuous integration pipeline already at my company. We need to develop it more. And the goal, I've said from day one, is continuous delivery, right? Right now we do releases every other Monday, and every now and then they go south. So we're not up late at night anymore. That's one of the changes I was able to make at the beginning of this year, but we still have that biweekly release. And so continuous delivery, deployment, and all that is the goal. Particularly David's discussion on feature flags blew my mind. I knew what they were, but how he talked about implementing them I just never heard of it before with an SDK and everything else. That was fantastic.
Yeah.
And he'd also mentioned Atlassian's talk on quality at speed. And so I've just started that episode or that video. So that episode, JavaScript Jabber number 426, incredible. I'm going to listen to it again, and I'm going to send it to my team to listen to.
Very cool. Thank you so much. Paul, so if somebody needs really good WordPress work, where would they find you?
So you can find me at battlestardigital.com. That is the web address of my web agency. Otherwise, I'm on social media at Paul Miller 3000 on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook.
Very good. Anything else you guys would like to add?
I'm good.
Yep. Battlestar Galactica. I love it.
That's right.
Well, thank you all so much. I hope to talk next week.
Thank you, guys. I had a blast.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thanks out, everybody.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.